Life is lived on the obsidian edge, where the stakes are high and one wrong move can change your destiny in an instant. Join us for a thrilling ride through the most dangerous and exciting stories of the human heart. Hit subscribe now and stay on the edge with us. I trusted him. I trusted every single word he said, and because of that, an innocent young woman's life was nearly destroyed. I will have to live with that for the rest of mine. My name is Robert, and I am 68 years old. I spent 32 years working for the city of Hamilton, Ontario, maintaining the water treatment facilities that kept this community running. I was never a rich man, but I was a careful one. I saved. I planned. My wife, Diane, and I had talked about what retirement would look like, the trips we would take, the grandchildren we would spoil, the slow mornings with coffee on the back porch, watching the cardinals come to the feeder she had hung from the old maple tree. Diane passed away 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in February, gone by September. The speed of it still doesn't feel real to me. One week she was complaining that the garden needed weeding, and 7 months later I was standing at her grave in Woodland Cemetery while the October wind pulled the leaves from the trees around us. After she died, the house felt like a building I had never lived in. I knew where everything was, but nothing felt like mine anymore. The coffee tasted wrong. The television was too loud. I stopped eating regular meals and started losing weight I could not afford to lose. My doctor, a kind woman who had known Diane and me for over a decade, sat me down in December and told me plainly that she was worried about me. Not just about grief, but about my physical health. I had developed some balance issues following a minor stroke I'd had 2 years prior, and without Diane managing my medications and keeping me on schedule, things had started to slip. She referred me to a home care agency. That's how Sarah came into my life. Sarah was 26 years old, a personal support worker with her certification and 2 years of experience in long-term care before she had left to pursue her practical nursing degree part-time. She was taking on home care clients to help pay her tuition. She was punctual, professional, and genuinely kind in a way that didn't feel performed. She showed up the first morning with a notebook and spent the first hour just asking me questions: what I liked to eat, what my routines were, whether I preferred she work quietly, or whether I liked conversation. She didn't treat me like a patient. She treated me like a person. Within a few weeks, she had settled into my household in a way that felt completely natural. She came 5 mornings a week, helped me with breakfast, made sure I took my medications on the proper schedule, drove me to my physiotherapy appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and handled some of the household tasks that had become difficult for me since the stroke. She never overstepped. She never went through my things without asking. When I offered to pay her more than the agency rate, she declined and told me the agency rate was fair. I looked forward to her visits more than I had looked forward to anything in months. My nephew Marcus had been living in my basement since the previous spring. He was 32 years old, the son of my late brother, and he had arrived on my doorstep in April with 2 duffel bags and a story about a landlord who had unfairly evicted him from his apartment in Mississauga. I believed the story because I wanted to. Marcus had always been charming in the way that certain people are charming effortlessly and without much effort toward anything else. He'd had a dozen jobs since he turned 20. He'd borrowed money from half the family and paid back almost none of it. But he was my brother's boy, and my brother had died when Marcus was 19, and I had always felt some responsibility toward him that I couldn't quite justify but couldn't quite abandon either. I asked Marcus to contribute to the household. He agreed with enthusiasm and then did almost nothing. He was home most of the time, sleeping late, watching television, occasionally disappearing for days without explanation. He didn't like Sarah. He never said so directly, but I noticed the way he looked at her when she arrived in the mornings, a flat, assessing look that had nothing warm in it. He made small comments. He told me once that it seemed strange how comfortable she had become in the house. He mentioned once that his friend's family had a home care worker who had stolen jewelry from his grandmother. I told him that Sarah was nothing like that. He held up his hands and said he wasn't suggesting anything. He was just saying, in January, I gave Marcus access to my checking account. I want to be honest about why I did this, because looking back, I can see how foolish it was, but at the time it felt reasonable. I had an upcoming week-long medical stay for a procedure, nothing critical, but I would be in the hospital, and unable to handle my own finances, and I needed someone to pay the utilities and the property tax installment that was due while I was away. My daughter lived in Vancouver and couldn't come out on short notice. Marcus was right there. He knew the PIN because I had told it to him once when he'd run an errand to the pharmacy for me, and I'd asked him to pick up a few groceries on the way back. I added him as an authorized user on the account for the duration of the stay. I told him specifically what needed to be paid and approximately how much was available. I told him nothing else was to be touched. I came home from the hospital to find my account had been accessed 9 times over 7 days. The utilities had been paid, the property tax had been paid. There were also 4 ATM withdrawals, totaling $1,140, and 2 e-transfers I did not recognize, amounting to another $900. $2,040 gone, with no explanation I could account for. I confronted Marcus that evening. He was in the basement, watching something on his laptop with headphones on, and he looked up at me with an expression of complete, practiced surprise. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. He said he had only made the payments I had asked him to make. He said he had the receipts somewhere and would find them. The receipts he produced the next morning showed only the legitimate payments. He had no explanation for the rest. And then he said something that I have spent months trying to understand how I believed. He told me he thought it might have been Sarah. He said it carefully, the way someone says something they claim to be reluctant to say. He said he wasn't sure, but that he had noticed a few things over the past couple of months. He said he had seen her going through the drawer in the kitchen where I sometimes kept an envelope of cash. He said he had seen her on her phone in my bedroom once, when she thought he wasn't watching. He said he had noticed that some items seemed to have gone missing, a spare set of keys, a small amount of cash he claimed I had left on the counter. He said he didn't want to get her in trouble. He said he was sure there was probably an explanation. He said he just thought I should know. I sat with it for 3 days. I told myself I was being fair, being careful, not reacting. But what I was actually doing was looking backward at 7 weeks of Sarah's presence in my home and reinterpreting every memory through the lens my nephew had handed me. The kitchen drawer. I remembered her opening it. I had asked her to get the takeout menus. But now, in the reinterpretation, the takeout menus were a cover. On the 4th day, I called the agency and told them I would not be needing Sarah's services any longer. I didn't give a specific reason. I said it was a personal decision. The woman on the phone paused for a moment and then said she understood. 2 days after that, I went to my bank and asked them to investigate the withdrawals. The bank manager, a careful and methodical man, walked me through each transaction. The ATM withdrawals had been made at a branch on Barton Street. The e-transfers had gone to an account under a name I didn't recognize. He told me that if I believed fraud had occurred, I should file a report with Hamilton Police. I filed the report. I told them about the unauthorized transactions. I told them about Marcus's access, but I also told them what Marcus had said about Sarah. I don't know why I included it. She was not authorized on the account. She had no access to my PIN, but I told them anyway because Marcus had planted the seed and I had let it grow in the dark for days. The police, to their credit, were thorough. They looked at the ATM camera footage. The ATM at the Barton Street branch had a camera, and the camera showed the person who made the withdrawals. Or so they told me. What they told me, and this is where I have to be honest about the limits of my own recollection, because I have gone over this conversation many times, was that the footage was grainy and inconclusive, but that based on the timeline and the information I had provided, they were looking at all individuals who had access to the household and the account. Somehow, in that process, and I believe Marcus was involved in how that narrative took shape, Sarah became a focus. I don't know exactly what Marcus said to the investigating officer or when he said it. I know he spoke with them. I know that within a week, Sarah was brought in for questioning. I know that within 2 weeks, she had been formally charged with fraud under $250,000 and breach of trust. I know, because I heard it secondhand through the agency, that she lost her PSW certification pending the outcome of the charges. I know that her nursing program placed her on academic suspension because the program required students to be in good standing without outstanding criminal charges. I know she had to move back in with her parents in Stony Creek because she could no longer afford her apartment. I know all of this now. At the time, I told myself that the process would sort itself out. I told myself that if she was innocent, she would be cleared. I told myself these things and went about my days and let Marcus make dinner some evenings and pretended that the house felt less empty than it did. My neighbor across the street is a man named Walter. He is 74 years old, a retired high school history teacher, and one of the few people on this street I have known long enough to call a genuine friend. Walter and Diane had been close in the way that neighboring couples sometimes become close backyard conversations, borrowed tools, the occasional dinner. After Diane died, Walter had been quietly, consistently kind to me. He shoveled my walkway without being asked after the January snowstorm. He left a container of his wife Eleanor's soup on my porch when I came home from the hospital. Walter had a security camera system installed the previous summer after a rash of car break-ins on our street. He had 2 cameras facing the street and one mounted on the side of his garage, which looked out at an angle covering not just his own driveway, but the near edge of mine and a portion of the sidewalk in front of my property. 6 weeks after the charges against Sarah were filed, Walter knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember it was a raw, gray day, the kind of day Hamilton specializes in during the shoulder season between winter and spring. He was wearing his old Labrador Retriever baseball cap and carrying a large thermos of coffee, which I later understood was an excuse to stay, as long as the conversation required. I let him in, and we sat at the kitchen table. He poured coffee for both of us. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Walter, there's something I need to show you, and I've been trying to find the right time for a few weeks now, and I don't think there is a right time, so I'm just going to do it." He set a USB drive on the table between us. He told me that when the story had reached him and things travel on a street like ours, he had gone back and reviewed the footage from his side camera covering the period of my hospital stay. He told me he had found something he thought the police needed to see. He had already made a copy for himself. He was bringing this one to me first, because he thought I deserved to see it before anyone else. I want to pause here because what I felt when he said that was not relief or dread or any clean emotion. It was something that felt like the moment before a car accident, when you have seen it coming and you know there is nothing left to do but absorb the impact. I put the drive into my laptop. The camera angle caught a portion of my driveway and the stretch of sidewalk in front of the house. The timestamp read January 14th, a Thursday, at 11:47 in the morning. That was the second day of my hospital stay. The figure in the footage was wearing a dark jacket with a hood pulled up, jeans, and white sneakers. He walked up my driveway, used a key to enter through the side door of my garage, the door that accessed the interior, and from there the mudroom, and disappeared inside. He was in the house for approximately 22 minutes. When he came out, he was moving quickly, his face partially turned from the camera, but the angle caught him at the edge of the driveway for 3 seconds, in a way that was clear and unambiguous. It was Marcus. The timestamp was consistent with one of the ATM withdrawals made that day, allowing enough time for him to have left the house, driven to the Barton Street branch, made the withdrawal, and been where he claimed to have been that afternoon. Walter had 4 days of footage. Marcus appeared twice more. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after Walter left. The USB drive sat next to the laptop. I kept looking at it the way you look at something you can't quite make real, even when it is sitting directly in front of you. Marcus was in the basement. I could hear the television. I thought about the moment he had said Sarah's name. I thought about how careful he had been, how he had framed it as reluctance, as concern, as something he almost didn't want to say. I thought about how I had let that framing do exactly what he had intended it to do. I thought about 7 weeks of memories I had turned against an innocent person because my nephew had handed me a direction to look, and I had looked. I thought about Sarah, 26 years old, her nursing program suspended, her certification revoked, living with her parents in Stony Creek, facing a criminal charge for something she had never done. I called my daughter in Vancouver that evening. I told her everything. She was quiet for a very long time, and then she said, "Dad, you need to call a lawyer tonight. And then you need to call the police in the morning." The lawyer she referred me to handled the matter with what I can only describe as efficient urgency. The footage was authenticated, the metadata confirmed, and the USB drive, along with Walter's original copy, was turned over to Hamilton Police within 48 hours of my conversation with Walter. My daughter flew in from Vancouver the following weekend. Marcus was arrested on a Friday morning. He had been asleep in my basement when the officers arrived. I stood in the front hallway and listened to the process of it, the knock, the brief exchange, the sound of the handcuffs, and I did not go downstairs. I did not have anything to say to him in that moment that would have been worth saying. He was charged with fraud over $5,000, theft, and mischief in relation to property, as well as making a false statement to police that had contributed to the wrongful investigation of Sarah. His lawyer later informed mine that Marcus had indeed spoken to the investigating officer in a way that had directed suspicion towards Sarah. He had told them, among other things, that he had personally witnessed her accessing my bedroom on multiple occasions and that he suspected she had obtained my banking information through routine access to my personal documents while working in the home. None of it was true. The charges against Sarah were stayed within 3 weeks of the new evidence being submitted. Her lawyer, who she had been working with through a legal aid clinic in Hamilton, filed for the expungement of the record. Her PSW certification was reinstated. Her nursing program took longer. The academic process moved at its own pace, and it was not until late spring that she was formally reinstated. She had missed an entire semester. I did not know how to approach her. I had been the one who had called the agency and ended her placement without explanation. I had been the one who had gone to the police and included her name in a conversation I should never have included her in. Yes, I had provided the evidence that cleared her. But the reason she had needed clearing was, in a significant part, my failure. I asked my daughter to help me write a letter. We went through several drafts over the course of a week, and each time I looked at the latest version, I thought about how inadequate words were for the shape of what had happened. My daughter finally said to me, "Dad, just write it the way you would say it. Don't write it the way you think it should sound." So I did. I wrote to Sarah, and I told her that I had trusted the wrong person and had failed to protect her when it was within my power to do so. I told her that I had known, in some part of myself, that I had chosen not to listen to, that something wasn't right about what I was being told, and I had looked away from that knowledge because it was easier. I told her that I was sorry, and that I understood if sorry meant very little at this point. I also told her that I had spoken with my lawyer about what restitution looked like in a practical sense. The semester she had lost the tuition, the cost of her legal representation beyond what legal aid had covered, the income she had lost during the months she had been unable to work, and the additional costs she had incurred moving back to her parents' home, came to an amount that my lawyer helped me calculate with some precision. I enclosed a bank draft for that full amount. Not a donation to a fund, not a contribution to a cause in her name. The money owed to her, for what had been taken. I told her there was no expectation of a response. She responded anyway. She called me on a Wednesday evening in June, and I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize the number. I am glad I did. She spoke for about 10 minutes, and I mostly listened. She told me she was angry. She said that clearly and without apology, and I thought she was right to say it. She told me that the months of uncertainty had affected her in ways that she was still working through. She told me that her parents had spent money they didn't have on her legal fees before the aid had come through, and that the weight of that was something she carried. But she also told me something else. She said that for the first few weeks after the charges were stayed, she had found herself thinking about me, not with anger exactly, but with something like grief. She said she had come into my home at one of the hardest points of my life, and she had genuinely cared about the work she was doing there. She had genuinely cared about me. And she said it had been hard to hold the two things at once, that I had failed her, and that she had cared about me because they both seemed true. I told her they were both true. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I just needed to say that out loud to you. I think I needed you to hear it." I told her I heard it. I told her I was grateful she had called. She finished her practical nursing semester that fall. I know this because she sent me a brief message in November, just a few lines, saying that she had passed her placement and would be writing her licensing exam in the spring. She didn't ask for anything. She just told me, the way you might tell someone who had been part of a difficult chapter, that the chapter was ending on better terms. Marcus entered a guilty plea in October. His lawyer negotiated a conditional sentence with significant community service hours and a restitution order for the amounts he had stolen. Given that it was a first conviction and the amounts, while meaningful, were under a certain threshold, he did not receive a custodial sentence. I will be honest that this frustrated me in ways I am still working through. But the legal process is the legal process, and I was told by my lawyer that the outcome was within the normal range for the circumstances. What I was not prepared for was the conversation I had with my daughter the night after the sentencing. She had flown back from Vancouver for it, not because it was strictly necessary, but because she wanted to be there with me. We sat at the same kitchen table where Walter had placed the USB drive 7 months earlier, and she asked me a question that I didn't expect. She asked me whether I thought, if Diane had still been alive, any of this would have happened. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about what Diane had known about Marcus that I had refused to fully acknowledge. She had never been unkind to him, but she had been clear-eyed about him in a way that I had never quite managed. She had once said to me, after he had borrowed money from us for the 3rd time in 2 years, "Robert, I love that boy because he's your brother's boy, but I want you to understand that he is not what you want him to be." I had nodded and changed the subject. I had done that more than once. I thought about Sarah, and how quickly Diane would have trusted her, and how she never would have let a seed of suspicion planted by Marcus take root without digging up the roots first. Diane had a capacity for clear judgment that I had always relied on without entirely knowing it, and when she was gone, I had tried to fill that space with other things, with Marcus's proximity, with a version of family loyalty that had nothing to examine it. I told my daughter honestly that I thought the answer was probably no, that if Diane had been alive, she would have protected us both, Sarah included, from what had happened. My daughter reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. That was the right call. The Cardinals still come to the feeder outside the back porch. I kept it stocked, even through the worst months when I wasn't doing much of anything else. Diane had hung it from the old maple tree, and I suppose I was not ready to let them stop coming. I have a new home care arrangement now. The agency sent someone different. A quiet man in his 50s named Patrick who comes 3 mornings a week and is thoroughly competent and completely no-nonsense about everything. He is not Sarah, but he is good at his work, and I have learned, at some cost, not to take good work for granted. I am more careful about who I trust and why. Not in a bitter way. I don't think bitterness is useful, and I've reached an age where I have less patience for things that are not useful, but in an awake way, in a paying attention way. I think about Walter a great deal, about the fact that he had been sitting on that footage for weeks, trying to figure out the right time, and ultimately decided that there was no right time and simply came across the street with a thermos of coffee and did the thing anyway. I think that is one of the most quietly courageous things I have seen a person do, and I did not thank him adequately at the time. I had him and Eleanor over for dinner in August. Eleanor made her soup again, and I bought a decent bottle of Ontario Red, and we sat at the dining room table that Diane and I had bought at an estate sale in Dundas 20 years ago, and we talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. When they left, Walter shook my hand at the door and told me to take care of myself. I told him I was working on it. That felt like the most honest answer I had. I am 68 years old. I have made serious mistakes. I have also, when I was given the chance, tried to account for them as fully as I was able. I don't know that those things balance out. I'm not sure that's how it works. But I know that the young woman who came into my home at the hardest point of my recent life and treated me with genuine dignity and care, has her certification, is finishing her nursing program, and has a path forward that was not permanently destroyed by what happened. That matters to me more than I know how to say. If you are watching this and you have someone in your life, a caregiver, a helper, a person who shows up when things are hard and does the work quietly and well, I hope you will be more careful than I was about who you listen to and why and what you are willing to protect. It is easy to be careless with someone else's reputation when you are in pain. It is easy to let loyalty to the wrong person override loyalty to the truth. It cost a young woman a year of her life and nearly everything she had worked for. I will not forget that. I am not meant to.